It was supposed to be a peaceful evening. Sabrina and her little son Liam were just enjoying a walk in the park when everything took a horrifying turn. Two officers approached them, and what happened next will leave you shocked. Stay until the end to witness a mother's courage and a family's fight for justice. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. The sun was setting over the park, casting a golden glow across the playground as Sabrina strolled down the winding paths, holding the small hand of her 6-year-old son, Liam. His laughter, light and full of innocence, echoed in the crisp evening air as he pointed excitedly at the swings ahead. "Mommy, can I go play?" Liam asked, his face lighting up with the boundless energy of a child. "Of course, sweetheart," Sabrina said with a smile, releasing his hand. She watched as he raced towards the swings, his little legs carrying him as fast as they could. It was their cherished routine, a quiet evening walk to the park, a chance to unwind and let Liam burn off his endless energy before bedtime. Sabrina loved these moments of calm. They gave her a sense of peace in a life that often felt overwhelming as a single mother. Tonight, however, an unsettling feeling lingered in the back of her mind. She brushed it aside, telling herself she was simply overthinking. Settling onto a nearby bench, Sabrina pulled her light jacket tighter against the cool breeze and watched Liam climb onto the swing. His laughter brought a soft smile to her face, and for a while, it felt like the rest of the world melted away. But that peace was shattered when she noticed them. Two men leaning against a bench under a street lamp, their silhouettes partially obscured in the dim light. Something about them made her stomach tighten. As they shifted, the glint of badges on their chests confirmed her worst fear: police officers. Normally, their presence might have brought a sense of security, but tonight it felt like a threat. She turned her gaze back to Liam, trying to ignore the men, but her heart sank as one of them pointed in her direction. The other chuckled, nudging his companion before they began strolling toward her. The sound of their boots crunching against the gravel seemed louder than it should have been, and Sabrina's pulse quickened. "Evening." The first officer, a burly man with a heavy build, greeted her with a lazy smirk. The scent of alcohol wafted from him, making her stomach churn. "Evening," she replied politely, her voice steady despite the nervous flutter in her chest. "What brings you and the little one out here so late?" he asked, his tone dripping with mock friendliness. "This doesn't seem like the kind of place you'd normally hang out." Sabrina frowned, sensing the implication behind his words. "We're just enjoying the park," she replied calmly. "My son loves the swings." The second officer, leaner but no less intimidating, chuckled. "Swings, huh? Don't you think it's a little late for that? You sure you're not lost?" The sarcastic tone made her jaw tighten. "No, we're not lost. We live nearby," she said firmly, refusing to let their hostility intimidate her. The burly officer leaned closer, towering over her. "Thing is," he said, his voice dropping to a cold whisper, "we don't usually see people like you around here at this hour. Might not be safe, you know." Her heart pounded as she met his gaze, feeling the weight of his scrutiny. "Thank you for your concern, but we're fine," she said, trying to keep her tone neutral. The second officer snorted, shaking his head. "You've got some nerve, lady, acting like you belong here." Liam, who had stopped swinging, was watching the exchange with wide, frightened eyes. Sabrina felt a wave of protectiveness surge through her. The last thing she wanted was for her son to witness this. She rose from the bench, her movements calm but deliberate. "Come on, Liam," she called, holding out her hand. "It's time to go." But as she stepped forward, the burly officer moved to block her path. "Not so fast," he sneered. "We're just getting to know you. Where's the rush?" "Please," Sabrina said, her voice steady but tinged with urgency. "We just want to go home." The leaner officer crossed his arms, his expression darkening. "What's the matter? We're just being friendly." Her grip tightened on Liam's hand as he clung to her side, his small frame trembling. She could feel his fear and confusion, and it broke her heart. Summoning her courage, she looked the officers in the eye and said firmly, "Please let us pass." The burly officer laughed, a cold, cruel sound. "You hear that? She thinks she can tell us what to do." The tension in the air was palpable as the second officer stepped closer, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "You'd better watch that tone, lady. Things might get a lot worse for you and your kid." Sabrina's breath caught in her throat as she realized how dire the situation had become. Her instincts screamed at her to get Liam out of there, but they were trapped, with the officers closing in on either side. She forced herself to stay calm, her voice soft but resolute. "We don't want any trouble. Please, just let us go." The burly officer smirked, reaching for his radio. "Trouble? Oh, I think you've already found it, lady." As he spoke, the leaner officer leaned down to Liam's level, his gaze cold and calculating. "Cute kid," he said mockingly. "Bet he'll learn some manners after tonight." "Don't touch him," Sabrina snapped, pulling Liam closer. The officer straightened, his face twisting into a sneer. "Big talk for someone in your position." Her heart pounded as she realized there was no easy way out. She had to stay strong for Liam no matter how terrifying the situation became. The chapter ends with Sabrina clutching her son's hand, her mind racing as she desperately searches for a way to protect him from the unfolding nightmare. Sabrina's heart pounded as she stood frozen, gripping Liam's trembling hand. The two officers loomed over her, their faces twisted with smirks that made their intentions painfully clear. She could feel the weight of their hostility pressing down on her, suffocating in its intensity. Liam clung to her side, his wide eyes darting between the men, tears pooling in his lashes. "Please," she said, her voice strained but steady, "we don't want any trouble. Let us leave." The larger officer, Carter, tilted his head mockingly. "Oh, you think you can just walk away? I don't think so, sweetheart. Not after that tone." His words were laced with menace, and before Sabrina could react, he reached out, grabbing her wrist with a grip so tight it sent a jolt of pain up her arm. She gasped, trying to pull free, but his strength was overwhelming. "Hey, let go of my mom!" Liam cried, stepping forward in a brave but futile attempt to defend her. The second officer, Reynolds, sneered and shoved Liam backward with a rough hand. The boy stumbled and fell, landing hard on the gravel. Tears streamed down his cheeks as he looked up at Sabrina, his face filled with confusion and fear. "Liam!" Sabrina screamed, her maternal instinct surging. She tried to reach for him, but Carter's grip tightened, yanking her back with brutal force. Pain shot through her shoulder as he twisted her arm behind her, forcing her to her knees. "You just made this worse for yourself," Carter growled, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. "You're resisting arrest." "Arrest?" Sabrina managed to gasp through the pain. "For what? We haven't done anything." Reynolds laughed coldly, stepping closer to Liam, who was still on the ground, his small hands clutching the torn remnants of his toy car. "Disturbing the peace, lady, and let's add raising a brat with no respect for authority." He reached down, snatching the broken toy from Liam's hands. Holding it up for Sabrina to see, he grinned maliciously before throwing it to the ground and stomping on it, grinding the pieces into the dirt with his boot. "Stop it!" Sabrina shouted, tears streaming down her face. "Please, he's just a child." Carter yanked her arm harder, forcing her other hand behind her back to snap the cuffs on. The cold metal bit into her wrist, leaving her skin raw as he pulled them tight. "And you're just another mouthy woman who doesn't know her place," he snarled. Reynolds crouched in front of Liam, picking up one of the broken pieces of the toy car. "This little thing meant something to you, kid?" he asked with feigned sympathy before tossing it aside with a smirk. "Tough luck." Sabrina's voice cracked as she screamed, "Don't you dare touch him!" Reynolds turned to her, his smile fading into a cold glare. "You should have thought of that before running your mouth." He grabbed Liam by the arm and hoisted him roughly to his feet, ignoring the boy's terrified cries. "Leave him alone!" Sabrina yelled, struggling against Carter's iron grip. The cuffs dug deeper into her skin, but she didn't care. All that mattered was protecting her son. Carter laughed, his breath reeking of beer as he leaned close to her ear. "Oh, don't worry. We'll take good care of the little guy while you learn some manners." Reynolds dragged Liam closer to Sabrina, shoving him against her legs. The boy clung to her, sobbing uncontrollably. "Mommy, I'm scared," he cried. Sabrina bent down as much as the cuffs allowed, wrapping her arms protectively around her son. "It's okay, baby," she whispered through her own tears. "I'm here. I won't let them hurt you." But her words felt hollow as Reynolds stepped back, reaching for a can of beer he'd left on the ground. He popped it open, taking a long swig before turning his attention back to Sabrina. "You look like you could use a drink," he said, a sinister smile spreading across his face. He walked toward her, tilting the can until its contents splashed onto her head. The cold liquid soaked her hair and dripped down her face, stinging her eyes and adding to her humiliation. "Stop it!" Sabrina shouted, her voice raw with desperation. "What kind of men are you?" Reynolds ignored her, shaking the can to spray the remaining beer across her and Liam. The boy whimpered, burying his face in her chest as the liquid soaked through their clothes. Carter chuckled darkly. "Welcome to the real world, lady. You think your little speeches are going to change anything? Think again." Reynolds crouched in front of Liam, his expression turning mockingly sweet. "Hey, kid, you ever had a taste of the good stuff?" He held the empty can close to the boy's face, laughing as Liam squirmed and turned away. Sabrina's rage bubbled over. "You're monsters," she shouted, her voice breaking. "You're nothing but cowards hiding behind badges." Carter's grin faded, replaced by a scowl. He grabbed Sabrina's chin roughly, forcing her to look up at him. "You'd better watch your mouth, or I'll make you regret every word." "I already do," she spat back, her defiance burning through the fear. The officers exchanged glances, their amusement replaced by a cold, calculated menace. Reynolds straightened, brushing the dirt off his uniform as if preparing for something worse. "You know," he said, his tone suddenly serious, "maybe it's time we teach her a real lesson." Carter nodded, hauling Sabrina to her feet with a sharp yank. She stumbled, nearly falling, but managed to regain her balance despite the pain shooting through her wrists. "Let's take this party somewhere private," Carter said, his smirk returning. "The station's got plenty of room for troublemakers like her." Reynolds grabbed Liam's arm again, this time with enough force to make the boy cry out. Sabrina's heart shattered at the sound, but she couldn't do anything. Her hands were bound and her strength was no match for theirs. The chapter ends with Sabrina being dragged toward the waiting police car, her son in tow. Her mind raced, searching for a way to protect Liam as the officer's laughter echoed in the night, drowning out her desperate pleas. The cold night air was heavy as Sabrina and Liam were dragged toward the waiting police car. Sabrina's wrists throbbed from the handcuffs biting into her skin, but the pain was nothing compared to the ache in her heart as she watched Reynolds yank Liam along by the arm. Her son's sobs cut through her like a knife, each one more unbearable than the last. "Let him go!" Sabrina screamed, her voice hoarse and raw. "He's just a child." Carter turned and shoved her forward, forcing her to stumble before catching her balance. "You should have thought about that before you opened your mouth," he sneered, his words thick with contempt. Reynolds laughed as he tightened his grip on Liam's arm, ignoring the boy's desperate attempts to pull away. "You're lucky we're letting him ride along. He could have ended up in child services tonight." Sabrina's mind raced. She had to think of something, anything, to protect Liam. Her body trembled as fear and anger coursed through her veins, but before she could act, a voice cut through the darkness. "Hey, what the hell is going on here?" Both officers froze, their heads snapping toward the sound. Sabrina turned as well, her heart leaping with a mix of relief and shock. Emerging from the shadows was a man she hadn't seen in years, her brother, Marcus. His tall frame and broad shoulders made him an imposing figure, but it was the fire in his eyes that caught everyone's attention. "Marcus," Sabrina gasped, her voice barely audible. Reynolds straightened, his smirk faltering for the first time. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded, his grip on Liam loosening slightly. "I'm her brother," Marcus said, stepping closer with deliberate intensity. "And you two are going to let them go, now." Carter barked a laugh, shaking his head. "Oh yeah? What are you going to do about it, big guy?" Marcus didn't flinch. Instead, he pulled out his phone and raised it in front of him. The red recording light blinked ominously in the dim light. "I'm going to make sure the entire city sees exactly what kind of cowards you are." The confidence drained from the officers' faces as they exchanged uneasy glances. Reynolds dropped Liam's arm, the boy immediately running to Sabrina's side and burying his face against her leg. "Put that phone away," Carter growled, stepping toward Marcus. "You don't know who you're messing with." "Oh, I know exactly who I'm dealing with," Marcus shot back. "Two racist thugs with badges who think they can do whatever they want. Not tonight." Carter lunged, but Marcus sidestepped him effortlessly. "Touch me, and you'll have assault charges added to your list," Marcus said, his voice cold and steady. "Go ahead, make my case even stronger." A small crowd had begun to gather at the edge of the park, drawn by the commotion. Their murmurs grew louder as they realized what was happening. Several people pulled out their phones, recording the scene as Marcus stood his ground. "You think these people are going to save you?" Reynolds sneered, his bravado returning. "They'll scatter the second we show them who's in charge." Marcus ignored him, his attention shifting to the growing crowd. "You all see this?" he called out, his voice ringing with authority. "These two men think they're above the law. They're harassing a mother and her child for no reason. Are we just going to stand here and let them get away with it?" The crowd stirred, emboldened by his words. A few voices shouted back, "No!" and "This isn't right." Carter's jaw tightened as the tide began to turn against him. "You've got no idea who you're messing with," he said, his voice low and dangerous. Marcus smirked, lifting his phone higher. "You're right, I don't. But I'm about to make sure everyone else does." Reynolds, clearly rattled, reached for his radio. "We need backup at—" "No, you don't," Marcus interrupted sharply. "You don't need backup. You need to walk away before you make this worse for yourselves." "Worse?" Carter spat. "You think you've got the upper hand here? Let me show you how wrong you are." Before anyone could react, Carter lunged again, this time aiming to grab Marcus's phone. Marcus sidestepped once more, but this time he struck back, shoving Carter off balance. The officer stumbled, his expression twisting with rage. The crowd gasped, and several people stepped forward, their phones capturing every second. "Leave him alone," a voice shouted from the group. The tension crackled like electricity as Marcus stood firm, his gaze unwavering. "Enough of this," he said, his tone deadly serious. "You're done here." The sound of distant sirens cut through the night, growing louder with each passing second. The officers froze, their faces paling as they realized reinforcements were on the way. Not for them, but because of them. "Time's up," Marcus said, his voice laced with satisfaction. "You're about to answer for everything you've done." When the squad cars pulled up, their flashing lights illuminating the park, the officers inside quickly assessed the situation. Marcus wasted no time approaching them, showing the video he'd recorded. Sabrina watched as their expressions shifted from confusion to grim understanding. Within minutes, Carter and Reynolds were handcuffed and escorted to a waiting vehicle, their earlier bravado replaced by quiet defeat. The crowd erupted into cheers and applause, their voices ringing with relief and triumph. Marcus turned to Sabrina, his face softening as he knelt beside her. "Are you okay?" he asked gently. Sabrina nodded, tears streaming down her face as she held Liam close. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know what we would have done without you." Marcus reached out, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You're safe now," he said firmly. "I promise." As the police cars disappeared into the night, Sabrina felt the weight of the nightmare begin to lift. The chapter ends with her holding Liam tightly, her gratitude for Marcus and the support of the crowd giving her the first glimmer of hope she'd felt all evening. The courthouse buzzed with hushed voices as Sabrina stepped inside, clutching Liam's hand tightly. The trial had drawn a crowd of reporters, activists, and concerned citizens, all eager to witness the case that had sparked outrage across the city. Marcus walked beside her, a steady presence that had been her anchor since that horrific night in the park. The days leading up to this moment had been grueling. Sabrina had relived every painful detail in her mind, preparing to recount them in front of a courtroom. Liam, too young to fully understand, had nightmares, waking up screaming for her in the middle of the night. But today, Sabrina was resolute. She wasn't just fighting for herself and her son. She was fighting for justice, for every mother and child who had been silenced by fear. As they entered the courtroom, Sabrina felt the weight of dozens of eyes on her. Liam clung to her side, his small hand gripping hers like a lifeline. The gallery was packed with supporters, their faces a mix of empathy and determination. Marcus gave her a reassuring nod before guiding them to their seats. At the front of the room, Carter and Reynolds sat at the defense table. Gone were the smirks and bravado that had defined their actions that night. Now they looked pale and subdued, their heads bowed as if trying to avoid the judgment of the crowd. When the judge entered, the room fell silent. The trial began with the prosecutor laying out the charges: harassment, child endangerment, and abuse of power. Each word landed heavily, a stark reminder of the pain Sabrina and Liam had endured. Sabrina was the first to take the stand. As she rose, Liam looked up at her, his wide eyes filled with both fear and trust. She bent down to kiss his forehead before making her way to the witness box. Sitting tall, she met the prosecutor's gaze and nodded, ready to tell her story. "Mrs. Daniels," the prosecutor began, his voice calm but firm. "Can you describe what happened on the evening of April 14th? Sabrina took a deep breath, steadying herself. "My son and I were at the park," she began. "It was supposed to be a normal evening, just like any other, but then they arrived." She described the encounter in vivid detail, the officers' taunts, the violent arrest, and the cruelty they inflicted on Liam. Her voice trembled as she recounted how Reynolds had dragged her son, how Carter had poured beer on her, and how helpless she had felt in that moment. Tears streamed down her face, but she didn't stop. She owed it to Liam to be strong. The prosecutor listened intently, allowing her to speak uninterrupted. When she finished, he asked, "How did these actions affect your son?" Sabrina glanced at Liam, who sat quietly in his seat, his small hands gripping Marcus's arm. "He hasn't slept through a single night since," she said, her voice cracking. "He wakes up screaming, afraid that someone will take me away again. He doesn't trust people the way he used to." The courtroom was silent as her words sank in. Even the judge's usually stern expression softened. When the prosecutor finished, the defense attorney rose. He tried to paint the incident as a misunderstanding, suggesting that the officers had acted out of concern for public safety. Sabrina met his questions with unwavering clarity, refusing to let him twist the truth. "No," she said firmly, "they didn't act out of concern. They acted out of hatred." Next, Marcus took the stand. His testimony was as powerful as Sabrina's, bolstered by the video he had recorded. The footage, played for the courtroom, silenced even the most skeptical observers. It showed everything: the officers' aggression, their racist remarks, and the terror on Liam's face as he clung to his mother. When the video ended, the gallery erupted in murmurs. The judge called for order, but the impact was clear. The defense had no counter-argument strong enough to undo what everyone had just seen. The trial lasted for days, with witnesses, experts, and character references presenting their cases. Carter and Reynolds sat silently, their earlier arrogance replaced by an uneasy stillness. Finally, the day of the verdict arrived. Sabrina sat between Marcus and Liam, her heart pounding as the judge entered the room. The silence was deafening as he began to speak. "After careful consideration of the evidence and testimonies presented, this court finds the defendants guilty on all charges." A collective sigh of relief rippled through the courtroom. Some spectators clapped quietly, while others wiped away tears. Sabrina felt her shoulders sag as the weight she had been carrying for weeks finally lifted. The judge continued, addressing the defendants directly. "Your actions were a blatant abuse of power and a betrayal of the trust placed in you as officers of the law. This court sentences you to 5 years in prison, with mandatory counseling and community service upon release." As the officers were led away in handcuffs, Sabrina felt a mixture of relief and vindication. Justice had been served, but the scars of that night remained. In the weeks that followed, the case became a catalyst for change. Protests and rallies led by Marcus pushed the police department to implement reforms, including mandatory bias training and stricter oversight of officers' behavior. Sabrina, though still healing, found strength in sharing her story with others, inspiring them to stand up against injustice. One evening, as the sun set over the same park where the nightmare had begun, Sabrina sat on a bench watching Liam play. He laughed as Marcus pushed him on the swings, his joy a reminder of the resilience children could have when surrounded by love. Marcus joined her on the bench, wiping his brow with a smile. "He's a tough kid," he said, nodding toward Liam, "just like his mom." Sabrina smiled softly, the weight of the past finally beginning to lift. "We've come a long way," she said, "but there's still more to do." Marcus placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We'll get there," he said, "together." The chapter closes with Sabrina watching Liam as he runs toward her, his laughter filling the air. For the first time in weeks, she feels hope, a quiet but unshakable belief that they will face whatever comes next with courage and strength. If this story moved you, don't forget to like this video, share it with others, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more stories like this to light. Let us know in the comments what you think about Sabrina's courage and what you would have done in her place. Together, we can raise awareness and fight for justice.